The relationship between India and the Jewish people traces back more than 2 millennia, forming one of the most ancient and uninterrupted cultural ties in human history. Long before the establishment of modern political states or diplomatic embassies, the foundations of this enduring bond were being laid through trade, maritime journeys, and peaceful coexistence. The first known Jewish settlements in India date back to the 1st century CE, with some traditions suggesting even earlier roots. These Jewish communities found themselves along the Malabar coast, in areas like Kerala and parts of Maharashtra, where Indian society allowed them to integrate while preserving their distinct religious and cultural identity. One of the earliest Jewish groups believed to have arrived in India was the Cochin Jews, often referred to as Malabar Jews. Oral tradition and some historical accounts suggest they arrived after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE. These Jews settled in and around Cochin, now Kochi, where they built synagogues, practiced their faith, and thrived under the patronage of local Indian rulers. They were welcomed not as outsiders, but as respected members of the social fabric. This warmth was not a one-off act of tolerance, but an enduring trait of Indian civilization, which valued pluralism and religious diversity. In addition to the Cochin Jews, another Jewish community, the Beni Israel, has a long-standing presence in the western part of India, particularly around the Konkan region and Mumbai. The Beni Israel claim descent from Jewish ancestors who were shipwrecked off the coast of India and gradually assimilated into local life while maintaining their religious customs and identity. Their integration into Indian society was remarkable. They adopted local languages like Marathi, participated in professions ranging from oil pressing to military service, and yet never faced systemic discrimination or exclusion from the Hindu, Muslim, or other communities around them. Their synagogues stood proudly in urban centers, and their festivals and rituals were carried out with the same reverence as any other community's traditions. Trade played a major role in fostering these early connections. India's geographic location and its thriving coastal ports became hubs for international commerce in the ancient world. Jewish merchants were part of this vibrant trading network that connected the Roman Empire, the Middle East, and South Asia. Spices, silk, textiles, and precious stones from India found their way to markets in the Mediterranean and beyond, often facilitated by Jewish traders who brought not only economic value, but also cultural bridges between civilizations. These commercial routes did more than exchange goods. They carried with them ideas, languages, and stories that enriched both Indian and Jewish cultures. The harmonious relationship between the Jews and Indians stood in stark contrast to Jewish experiences elsewhere in the world. In medieval Europe and even parts of the Middle East, Jews faced pogroms, forced conversions, and exile, but in India their history is marked by a lack of persecution. Indian rulers, whether Hindu, Muslim, or later colonial authorities, generally allowed Jewish communities to flourish. They built synagogues like the Paradisi Synagogue in Cochin, which stands as a monument not only to faith but to tolerance. This synagogue, adorned with Chinese tiles, Belgian chandeliers, and Hebrew inscriptions, symbolizes the cosmopolitan yet deeply rooted nature of India's Jewish heritage. Even during periods of external upheaval, such as the arrival of the Portuguese in the 16th century, who brought with them the Inquisition and European-style intolerance, Indian society offered sanctuary. While the Portuguese targeted Jews in some of their territories, local Indian rulers often protected them, allowing them to continue their way of life. These episodes further strengthened the mutual trust between the Jewish community and the Indian populace. It is also noteworthy that the cultural exchange was not unidirectional. While Jews adopted many Indian customs, including dress, food, and language, they also contributed to Indian art, music, and even the military. Some Bene Israel Jews served with distinction in the British Indian Army, and others played significant roles in the development of Indian cinema, literature, and education. They were not merely guests in the land, they were co-creators of the Indian cultural mosaic. Thus, the bond between India and the Jewish people is not rooted in temporary political alignment, but in a shared history of peaceful engagement, mutual respect, and enduring friendship. This unique relationship spans centuries and continents, and is carried not just in history books, but in the lived experiences of people. Unlike many geopolitical alliances of convenience, the India-Jewish bond is built on a cultural and spiritual foundation that has stood the test of time. Long before the term strategic partnership existed, there was a quiet, deeply human connection between these two civilizations, nurtured not in war rooms and treaties, but in the everyday lives of communities that lived together in harmony. Throughout history, the Jewish people have faced waves of persecution, discrimination, and displacement in many parts of the world. From ancient times to the 20th century, Jews were often treated as outsiders, subjected to forced conversions, expulsions, pogroms, and genocides. However, in stark contrast to this pattern of suffering, India stands as a unique exception, a land where Jews not only found refuge but lived for centuries with dignity, respect, and complete religious freedom. This historical fact is not merely a footnote, but a central pillar of the unbreakable bond between India and the Jewish people. India's tolerance and acceptance of Jewish communities made it one of the safest and most hospitable lands for Jews outside of Israel. When Jewish families and traders arrived in India over 2,000 years ago, they encountered an unfamiliar but remarkably welcoming environment. Unlike the rigid religious hierarchies or intolerant regimes that Jews had experienced in other regions, Indian civilization was built on principles of pluralism and coexistence. This meant that communities such as the Cochin Jews, Bene Israel, and Baghdadi Jews were able to preserve their distinct religious identity without fear of forced assimilation or persecution. Their synagogues, schools, and customs were respected, and they were given the space to practice their faith openly. The broader Indian society, comprising Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Parsis, and Buddhists, interacted with them not through a lens of suspicion, but as fellow citizens and neighbors. The Cochin Jews, who settled primarily in Kerala, were especially known for the harmony they shared with local rulers and communities. Historical records suggest that Hindu kings extended patronage to them, granting land for synagogues and recognizing them as a distinct and respected community. In fact, one of the most significant documents of Jewish history in India is the set of copper plates given to Joseph Rabban, a Jewish leader in Kerala, by a local Hindu ruler around the 10th century. These plates granted the Jewish community rights of self-governance, tax privileges, and autonomy, privileges rarely granted to minority communities elsewhere in the world at that time. Such gestures weren't symbolic. They had real political and social significance, showing that Jews were not seen as outsiders or threats, but as contributors to the larger society. Similarly, the Beni Israel community, which lived mostly in the western regions of India, particularly in Maharashtra, flourished over centuries. Despite their relatively small numbers, they played prominent roles in various professions, including agriculture, trade, military service, education, and the arts. Unlike in Europe or parts of the Islamic world, where Jews were often ghettoized or barred from certain occupations, the Beni Israel in India faced no such restrictions. They integrated seamlessly into Indian life, celebrating Jewish religious holidays alongside Indian festivals, speaking local languages like Marathi, and even participating in India's struggle for independence. In the 18th and 19th centuries, another wave of Jewish immigrants, the Baghdadi Jews, arrived in India, fleeing persecution and instability in Iraq and other parts of the Middle East. Many of them settled in cities like Kolkata and Mumbai, where they built impressive synagogues and contributed significantly to commerce, education, and philanthropy. Figures like David Sassoon, a Baghdadi Jew who migrated from Baghdad to Bombay, now Mumbai, became major philanthropists and industrialists. The Sassoon docks and other public institutions funded by the family remain symbols of the Jewish contribution to Indian society. What makes India's relationship with its Jewish communities so unique is the complete absence of anti-Semitism throughout history. There were no pogroms, no forced conversions, no accusations of blood libel or dual loyalty. Jews were never scapegoated during times of political instability or economic hardship. Even during the colonial period and the partition era, when communal tensions between other religious groups flared, Jews remained untouched by the violence. This peaceful coexistence is not only rare in Jewish history, but almost unparalleled. It points to a deeper civilizational ethic in India, an ethos that values diversity and respects all spiritual paths. Moreover, India's treatment of Jews stands as a moral contrast to the rest of the world, especially during critical periods like World War II and the Holocaust. While much of the world either actively participated in or turned a blind eye to the genocide of 6 million Jews, India remained a place where Jews lived safely. Although India was under British rule during the war, and therefore unable to independently offer asylum on a large scale, the Jews already living in India were never in danger, and some European Jews did manage to find refuge in Indian territories. The post-independence era further solidified this bond. Even after the formation of Israel in 1948, many Indian Jews emigrated to the new Jewish state, but they left with affection and gratitude for India, not as refugees fleeing persecution, but as citizens of a country that had embraced them for generations. Many of them continued to maintain cultural and emotional links with India, returning often and cherishing their dual heritage. The story of Jewish life in India is thus one of trust, protection, and mutual enrichment. It reveals a deeper truth about the Indian ethos, one that cherishes the sanctity of all faiths and allows minority communities to live not as second-class subjects, but as equal and honored members of the nation. In a world where intolerance and bigotry have often defined the treatment of Jews, India's example stands tall as a beacon of harmony and humanity. This legacy of safety and acceptance is not just a historical curiosity. It is one of the cornerstones of the deep and enduring relationship between India and Israel. Before India and Israel officially established diplomatic relations in 1992, the two nations shared a quiet but significant history of covert cooperation. This discreet partnership, often hidden from public view due to geopolitical sensitivities, particularly India's relations with the Arab world and the Palestinian cause, was forged out of mutual interests and a shared understanding of regional threats. Long before political leaders stood together at podiums, Indian and Israeli officials, intelligence agencies, and defense experts were working behind the scenes to build a foundation of trust and collaboration that would eventually evolve into one of the most strategic partnerships of the 21st century. In the years following India's independence in 1947 and the establishment of Israel in 1948, both nations found themselves navigating complex regional environments. India, a leader in the non-aligned movement, was trying to maintain neutrality in the Cold War era, while also courting good relations with Arab nations to secure energy needs and avoid alienating its significant Muslim population. As a result, India did not immediately recognize Israel diplomatically, though it did formally acknowledge its existence in 1950. However, despite the absence of full diplomatic ties, both nations shared similar concerns. Both were surrounded by hostile neighbors, faced the threat of terrorism, and relied on strong internal intelligence networks to maintain national security. One of the earliest instances of quiet collaboration came during the Indochina War in 1962, when Israel reportedly offered military aid to India, although it remained unofficial. This gesture marked the beginning of a strategic understanding that would become more pronounced during the 1965 and 1971 Indo-Pak Wars. The 1971 war in particular was a turning point. As India prepared for a full-scale conflict with Pakistan, which ultimately led to the creation of Bangladesh, Israel stepped in to assist India with crucial defense supplies, particularly arms and ammunition. Due to the sensitive nature of India's foreign policy at the time, this assistance was kept confidential, with the shipments routed through third countries or private intermediaries to avoid political backlash. The cooperation extended beyond military hardware. Intelligence sharing between the two countries began to evolve during this period, especially as both nations found themselves fighting enemies that used non-state actors and proxy warfare. India had long battled cross-border terrorism from Pakistan, while Israel faced frequent threats from militant organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. Their respective intelligence agencies, India's Research and Analysis Wing RAW and Israel's Mossad, began informal exchanges of information, tactics and counter-terror strategies. These exchanges helped India improve its understanding of counter-insurgency and urban warfare, especially in difficult terrains like Kashmir and the Northeast. One particularly notable instance of this covert cooperation came in the aftermath of Operation Entebbe in 1976, where Israeli commandos rescued hostages from a hijacked plane in Uganda. Indian intelligence officials reportedly studied the operation in great detail and later sought Israeli advice for developing similar rapid response capabilities. While India remained publicly distant from Israel during this era, it was quietly absorbing lessons from Israel's experiences in handling high-stakes military operations and counter-terror missions. The Kargil War in 1999 marked another important chapter in this evolving partnership. Although by this time India and Israel had officially established diplomatic relations, much of their cooperation still took place away from the media spotlight. During the conflict, when Pakistani intruders had occupied high-altitude Indian posts in the Kargil region, Israel supplied India with crucial military equipment, including unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, laser-guided bombs, and surveillance technology. These tools proved vital in neutralizing enemy positions located in treacherous mountainous terrain. Israeli assistance was swift, precise, and without bureaucratic delay, further cementing India's confidence in the reliability of Israeli support during crisis situations. Another factor that brought the two countries closer was the rise of Islamic terrorism as a global threat. The 2008 Mumbai attacks, in which terrorists targeted multiple locations across the city, including the Jewish Chabad house, was a tragic turning point. While the attack itself was a symbol of shared vulnerability, the aftermath became a symbol of unity. Israeli officials provided assistance in the investigation and helped train Indian security forces in anti-terror protocols, hostage rescue operations, and intelligence coordination. What makes this phase of pre-official cooperation between India and Israel especially noteworthy is how both countries managed to build strategic trust under difficult diplomatic conditions. While India was cautious about aligning too closely with Israel due to its dependence on Middle Eastern oil and domestic political sensitivities, it still chose to engage with Israel in a low-profile but effective manner. For Israel, India represented not just a vast potential market for its defense exports, but a like-minded partner in a world where security and survival often required pragmatic alliances. This hidden history of quiet cooperation laid the groundwork for the robust strategic partnership that would emerge in the open after 1992. It showed that even without public declarations and ceremonial visits, two nations with shared challenges could collaborate effectively, driven by realism, necessity, and mutual respect. The bond formed in the shadows of diplomacy eventually stepped into the light, but its roots were embedded deep in decades of discreet support, silent friendship, and unwavering strategic alignment. In the modern era, the relationship between India and Israel has transformed into a dynamic, multidimensional strategic alliance grounded in shared interests, mutual respect, and complementary strengths. Since the formal establishment of full diplomatic relations in 1992, both nations have aggressively expanded cooperation across critical sectors such as defense, agriculture, water management, cybersecurity, innovation, and space technology. This partnership is no longer defined solely by history or culture. It is now a model of pragmatic collaboration between two democracies facing similar challenges and pursuing common goals. One of the most visible aspects of India-Israel cooperation lies in the field of defense and security. Israel has emerged as one of India's top three defense suppliers alongside Russia and France. This partnership has been fueled by Israel's cutting-edge military technology and India's vast defense requirements. Israeli companies have supplied India with a wide range of equipment, including drones, radar systems, air defense platforms, surveillance tools, and precision-guided munitions. One of the landmark deals was the Barak 8 surface-to-air missile system, jointly developed by Israel Aerospace Industries (IAI) and India's Defense Research and Development Organization (DRDO), which significantly strengthened India's naval and air defense capabilities. In addition to hardware, Israel has played a critical role in upgrading India's counter-terror and intelligence infrastructure. Israeli defense firms and security experts have provided training to Indian special forces, particularly in urban warfare, anti-terror operations, and border surveillance. After the 2008 Mumbai attacks, which exposed significant gaps in India's counter-terror response, Israeli security protocols and technologies were adopted to enhance the preparedness of Indian security forces. The cooperation extends to intelligence sharing, with both countries exchanging real-time information on terror networks and regional threats, especially in relation to Islamic extremism and cyber warfare. Beyond the battlefield, India and Israel have forged strong ties in the areas of innovation and technology. Israel, often called the startup nation, is known globally for its advanced innovation ecosystem, particularly in areas like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, robotics, and biotechnology. India, with its growing economy and large pool of skilled human capital, presents a natural partner for Israeli tech companies looking to scale solutions. Numerous Israeli startups have entered the Indian market through joint ventures, technology transfers, and R&D collaborations. In return, Indian companies and institutions have benefited from Israeli innovation in solving complex challenges, particularly in agriculture, water management, and smart city solutions. Agriculture is a standout pillar of this bilateral relationship. Despite having vastly different geographies, India and Israel face similar challenges: water scarcity, unpredictable weather, and the need to increase agricultural productivity. Israel's pioneering work in drip irrigation, desert farming, and climate resilient agriculture has been adopted across several Indian states through a unique network of centers of excellence, COEs. These centers, jointly established by Israeli experts and Indian agricultural departments, serve as hubs of technology, transfer, training, and demonstration for Indian farmers. Farmers in Haryana, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and other states have seen dramatic increases in crop yield and water efficiency thanks to Israeli techniques, underscoring how this cooperation impacts lives at the grassroots level. Water management is another critical area where Israel's expertise has found a receptive partner in India. Facing severe water stress in many regions, India has turned to Israel's world-renowned water technologies, including wastewater recycling, desalination, and water conservation systems. Israeli companies have been involved in several Indian urban and rural water projects, helping to reduce wastage, improve access to clean water, and create sustainable irrigation models. These efforts not only strengthen bilateral ties, but also directly contribute to India's broader development goals and its mission of building climate-resilient infrastructure. Space and science collaboration is also rapidly growing. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, and the Israel Space Agency, ISA, have worked together on several satellite and research initiatives. These joint projects include satellite launches and data sharing for weather forecasting, environmental monitoring, and natural disaster prediction. Given both nations' ambitions in space technology and their strategic interests in using satellite systems for defense and civilian purposes, this area is expected to expand significantly in the coming years. At the diplomatic level, the warmth between the two nations is evident through high-level visits and public expressions of support. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic visit to Israel in 2017, the first by an Indian head of state, was a defining moment in bilateral ties. It was followed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to India in 2018, which further deepened cooperation in trade, investment, and innovation. The personal rapport between the two leaders symbolized a break from the past reluctance and marked a new chapter of openness and strategic embrace. Public sentiment in both countries has also evolved. In Israel, India is seen as a trustworthy and rising global power with whom long-term cooperation is not only possible but desirable. In India, Israel is increasingly viewed as a reliable partner who has always stood by the country in times of need, particularly during military conflicts and crises. The media, academia, and private sectors in both countries continue to build bridges, fostering cultural understanding and people-to-people connections. This modern-day alliance between India and Israel is more than a transactional relationship. It is a convergence of visions, of democratic nations harnessing technology to secure their borders, feed their people, conserve natural resources, and propel their economies. It is a partnership built not only on mutual benefit, but also on mutual admiration for each other's resilience, ingenuity, and national character. As both nations navigate a world of shifting alliances and rising uncertainty, their bond stands as a testament to what can be achieved when history, strategy, and shared values come together in a spirit of cooperation and trust.